This video will cover Chapter 1, Concepts and Tests and Measurements. The learning objectives for this chapter are to define the terms test, measurement, and evaluation, differentiate between norm-referenced and criterion-referenced standards, differentiate between formative and summative evaluations, discuss the importance of measurement and evaluation processes, and identify the purposes of measurement and evaluation. Additional objectives include identifying the importance of objectives in the decision-making process and differentiating among the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains as they relate to human performance. There are some key terms that will be important to distinguish throughout this course. The terms measurement, test, and evaluation are all related but distinctive. Measurement is an act of assessing, usually resulting in assigning a number to quantify the amount of characteristic being assessed. An example of this would be the number of times you participate in moderate or vigorous activity in a week. A test is a written, oral, physiological, psychological, or mechanical instrument or tool used to make a particular measurement. For example, self-reporting or wearing a heart rate monitor would be an example of a test. An evaluation is a judgment and statement of quality, goodness, merit, value, or worthiness about what has been assessed. An evaluation is made by comparing a measure valued to some criteria or other measure. An example of an evaluation would be to compare one's amount of physical activity to the national recommendations. If we're looking at other examples, we look at BMI, the measure is the number, the test would be weight to height ratio, and the evaluation is to compare it to other recommendations. If a physical education teacher wanted to use a pedometer to record the number of steps that a student completed in a 40-minute physical education class, how would you differentiate among the test, measurement, and evaluation characteristics reflected in this? So the measurement would be the number of steps, the test would be the pedometer, and the evaluation would be comparing the number of steps to the class average. We can evaluate data based on two different standards. We have norm reference standards and criterion reference standards. For norm reference standards, some examples are the SAT, the GRE, IQ tests, or the ACT. Think about what that normative data is and how we get that normative data. The second way we can evaluate this is criterion reference standards. These compare a person's performance relative to a criteria that he or she needs to achieve to pass. For example, a driver's license exam, or a board of certification exam, or content mastery. If you need to demonstrate proficiency, you may need a score of at least 80%. There's a cutoff score. On the other hand, if we're looking at something like BMI, a normative example would be the average BMI for a 20-year-old male is 28.6. A criterion referenced standard would be a BMI of 28.6 is considered overweight. Overweight is considered between 25.0 to 29.9 of a BMI. Another example is the ACT. The national average in 2010 was 21. For Yale, the ACT in 2010, 75% had a score between 32 and 36, and 25% had a score between 27 and 31, and less than 1% had less than a 27. So as you can see, that ACT, we're using that normative data versus when we're talking about something like passing or failing, we're looking at some sort of criteria. There are also two different main types of evaluation. We have formative evaluations or summative evaluations. A formative evaluation is an initial or intermediate evaluation, such as a pretest or an interim report. It's important for tracking changes in the instructional, training, or research process, and great for mid-course corrections. Can you think of an example of a formative evaluation for a class? An example might be a specific assignment. What about an exercise? An example could be a pretest or a periodic strength test. Our second type of evaluation is a summative evaluation. This is usually some sort of final evaluation. It's useful for measuring programmatic achievement, such as did you achieve your program goals? An example of this in class would be a final exam or final project. An example of a summative evaluation exercise could be a 1RM test after a training program. The type of evaluation is determined by the use of the data. For example, a 10-week weight loss program in which each participant is measured every week. A formative evaluation would be the amount of weight lost each week, whereas the summative evaluation is the total weight loss. So why do we measure, test, and evaluate? It's important to understand because professionals in human performance will be making these types of decisions daily. There are 6 general purposes: placement, diagnosis, prediction, motivation, achievement, and program evaluation. On these next slides, we will be discussing the 6 different purposes. The first one is placement. For placement, an initial test or evaluation is used to allow a professional to group students based on their abilities. It can be used to facilitate learning because members of a group have the same starting point. Can you think of an example of this? One example could be grouping students who are swimming into beginner and advanced classes based on their different skill levels. The second purpose is diagnosis. This can be used to determine weakness or deficiencies. An example would be a physician administering treadmill stress tests to diagnose presence of severity of cardiovascular disease. When we're in this class, diagnosis will mean to evaluate test results to determine weakness or deficiencies. Diagnosis in certain contexts can be a word that is gatekept and should be used with care. However, this is the word that our book uses, so we will use it. In other settings, the term assess or assessment is preferred. Our next purpose is prediction. For prediction, it can be used to predict future events or results from present and or past data. It's the most difficult research goal to obtain. An example of this is the SAT or ACT scores being used to predict college performance. Current physical activity and or fitness levels can also be used to predict health risks. Our next purpose is motivation. This can be used to motivate students and participants. People need the challenge and stimulation they get from an evaluation of their achievement. One example would be, would you study as hard for your test if there were no grades? An additional example would be in athletics, how hard would one practice if they never got to play a game? Can you think of an example for exercise where motivation is used? One example could be how someone looks or how they feel or some other obtainable goal. our fifth purpose is achievement. This is used to evaluate participants' achievement in meeting established objectives. The assessment of achievement in a summative evaluation task that requires measurement and evaluation. For example, the grade you will receive at the end of this course is a measure of how well you learned the material. With an exercise, an achievement could be improving your 1RM. The last purpose is program evaluation. This is used to assess the level of achievement of program objectives. For example, demonstrating the student's physical activity experiences by comparing test results with test results of other schools. So this is evaluating the program as a whole. Now that we've discussed the purposes for test evaluation and measurement, we need to talk about how to evaluate those measures. Our two main things are reliability and validity. Reliability is the consistency of measurement, whereas validity is the truthfulness of the measurement. An example of reliability: if we are assessing somebody's range of motion of a specific joint, if we take that measurement multiple times within the same session, we should receive similar results. The instrument that we use to assess range of motion is something called a goniometer. Validity is looking at, is the test measuring what it's supposed to measure? So if we use that range of motion example, is the goniometer actually measuring range of motion? We also have objectivity, which is reliability between raters. We'll discuss more about this in future chapters. This slide is a great depiction of reliability and validity. If we look at the top left circle, all of the X's are clustered close together in the center. This is an example of high reliability and high validity. If we look at the top right one, we can see all of the X's are clustered close together, but they're not within that target. This is an example of high reliability, but low validity. So they're close together, so it's reliable, the same thing over and over again, but not where we want that to be. Then we look at the bottom left. We've got X's kind of all over the place, but there are some in the center. This is low reliability, but high validity. So we know that it's measuring what it's supposed to measure, but we can't get consistent measurements. And then the bottom, we've got low reliability and low validity. If we look here, half of the target or the X's aren't even on the target at all. It's kind of all over the place. Another thing that comes up that we will talk about later is the taxonomies in domains of human performance. Basically, this is a hierarchy, and each level is based on earlier levels having been achieved. Within the domains of human performance, we have three main domains: affective, cognitive, and psychomotor. Affective is our physiological or emotional attributes. This is how people feel about their performance. It's important, but it's difficult to measure. Then we have our cognitive, which is our knowledge-based information. This includes knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, and evaluation. And then we have psychomotor, which is movements, coordination, and use of all motor skill areas. These include reflexive movements, fundamental movements, and physical attributes. Each taxonomy is a hierarchy based on the previous levels. This table describes three different taxonomy structures. We've got Bloom in the left-hand column, we've got Cradwell and Bloom in the middle, and then we've got Harrow on the right. So again, this is a hierarchy. So we have to have knowledge before we can have comprehension. After we can have comprehension, then we could have application analysis, then we can have synthesis, and then we can have evaluation. So we need to progress these things in human performance in a stepwise manner. If we look as we go throughout history, if we look at Haro, we're looking at reflexive movements. Then an example is segmental reflexes. Then we have fundamental movements, such as locomotor movements. Then we have perceptual abilities, such as coordination, discrimination, or tactile discrimination. Then we have our physical abilities like endurance, strength, flexibility. Then we have skilled movements, going from simple to complex. And then non-discursive communication, such as expressive movement or interpretive movement. The last terms that we're going to define in this chapter are physical activity and physical fitness. Physical activity is a behavior defined as bodily movement, whereas physical fitness is a set of attributes that people have or achieve that relates to the ability to perform physical activity. So physical activity is something people do, whereas physical fitness is something people have or achieve. In summary, measurement and evaluation are vital for professionals and human performance. These tests should be reliable, relevant, and valid, and the evaluation process should be carefully considered and based on the objectives of the domains measured. The following are review questions based on this video. Question 1, which of the following represents a criterion referenced measurement? A, the top 10 students receive A's. B, everyone scoring over 75 passes. C, the middle 40% will be given C's. D, the lowest 3 scores are considered failing. Question 2. If you decide to pursue a master's degree in human performance, you may be required to take the GRE. What is the purpose of this measurement? A, predicting future academic success. B, selecting a course of study. C, selecting an appropriate career track. Or D, identifying academic weaknesses and selecting appropriate remedial action. Question 3. What is an initial evaluation used to determine group assignments called? A, achievement. B, diagnosis. C, placement. D, prediction. Question 4. What is a test? A, an instrument or tool used to make a particular measurement. B, an initial or immediate evaluation. C, a statement of quality, goodness, merit, value, or worthiness. D, an act of assessing. I would recommend knowing the answers to these questions prior to taking the module quiz.